Creating dynamic poses in extreme perspectives with Stable Diffusion was harder than I expected, but it was worth to see my ideas turn into an actual image. And in this video I'm gonna share with you the 4 crucial things I've learned. Know your models. This might sound basic, but even if the method I will show you can be followed with just one checkpoint for the full process, simply knowing when to switch to a different model can save you hours at a time. For example, while SD 1.5 is generally better at following ControlNet models like depth or open pose, it isn't that great when poses are complex. If you tried to use it to generate something like a person holding a sniper rifle in a weird angle, well, let's say you would be shooting yourself in the foot. Because even if the generation follows your ControlNet, AI might not understand what the part closest to the camera is. SDXL, however, has a greater prompt and concept comprehension, which makes it more able to understand what you want, and can sometimes compensate for its lack of a good ControlNet models. And that's why my first recommendation is that you have at least one SD 1.5 model and one SDXL model for each style you are into. In case you're a text-to-image enjoyer, PonyXL is very good with this style of poses. More so if you use the slider LoRa I made. The checkpoint is a bit weird to use, so read the description to understand it better. These generations can serve as inspiration or even starting images, but they don't follow the prompt much, so you can't really control them. Luckily, control is the main focus of this channel, and to achieve it, the next part is extremely important and will save us a lot of time. Even more so if we want something very specific. Creating good depth maps. Let's say I had this idea of someone cutting a watermelon, for YouTube's sake. I need to accurately tell AI what is close to the camera and what is far away. And the easiest and fastest way to do this for free is with PoseMy.art. I use this site all the time, and this is the best reason for it. Starting with the large library of poses with assets that can give us a good starting base to save some time. Here's one that swings a sword. Just click it and start posing. And here are some other scenes you might recognize too. If these don't help, you can also go to animations and poses, then type for what you're looking for, like swing, and this gives you multiple poses to choose from. Of course, nothing stops you from just starting with the base T-pose and moving and rotating things around. It is very intuitive, easy and fast. Maybe the only thing that gets a little annoying to pose are hands, but you have presets for those too. Okay, let's change the model to one with a more natural shapes, or else Stable Diffusion might make us a me character. I will use the Teen Fit Female 3D model. If you need more than one, you can add it here or just duplicate the one you have. I will modify the pose until I like the flow of it a little more, focusing on having a nice silhouette, so an easy to read pose. Then I will place the sword better. To get a more extreme perspective, I will go to Settings and move up the Field of View slider, adding some lens distortion. Then click on the export button right here and choose your aspect ratio. For me, it will be 912 by 512. Now I move the camera around until I find an angle that matches my sketch. You can always overlay your sketch with PureRef if you need to. This angle is very basic, but you can choose any angle you like here. You might struggle like me in the second example I will show. It's also important to add a floor if it is visible, to avoid Stable Diffusion generating a levitating character. First, save the camera position with this button so you can move around freely. Then just add a cube, move it and make it larger. I'll take this opportunity to duplicate the cube and use it as a thinner version of the blade. You will see why in a second. Once everything is ready, export both open pose with and without hands, as sometimes with can mess up a lot. Even though the most important part is preview depth and play with this slider. It marks the start and the end of the depth map. Your goal is to get maximum contrast while keeping the full body with a level of gray. I will use this to export different depth maps. One for the main body with no blade, hiding it with H, another one with everything in the scene, and you could also export one just for the hands, but I didn't really pose the hands, which is something I regret later. If you want to use this pose in a different scene or just save it for later, you can save it to your PC with this button. Then open any other scene, click a character and load it to apply it. You can do this with these other options as well. I have talked about this in multiple occasions now, but this time PoseMyArt is sponsoring this video, which is why I explained all the cool stuff they have while I usually don't. In some cases, you will want to export different depth maps and then combine them inside Photoshop like this one. This way, they both have enough variation. Another thing that we will do in Photoshop is draw our assets a little bit better. That's why I exported an image with only the body. Here I'm drawing the blade as I imagined its shape to be, to then paint using the values given by the placeholders I added on Pose My Art. Now I do the same for the watermelon. For the archer example, I basically exported the depth map and painted the bow in later. Same with the sickle here. If you want, you could fully draw your depth map like I did with this image. And it can work as well. With this, we have everything we need. I'm sorry if it was long, but it will save us a lot of time later. Enough preparing though, let's get started. We will import our ControlNet models, both OpenPose and depth map. I will start generating with SDXL, just so you can see the difference between models for this image. Set the aspect ratio and adjust it to 1352 by 760. Now, for prompting, I will keep the base prompt simple with the key notions of what I want. Base action, then add break, add the background, break again, and personally I like these tags. I'm not trying to get a perfect image, not even close. It is important to know what we are looking for though, to understand how to adjust parameters accordingly and when to move on with the image. A good pose and base anatomy. Wrong anatomy can be hard to fix. Best overlapping possible. We want the depth map to be followed as much as AI can, even if it means sacrificing a bit of the base image, like the background in these examples. I would rather this amalgamation than a small fit covered by sheets, so long as the leg comes closer to camera. The body overlapping what should be the sword is a no-no. If this happens, however, just adjust your ControlNet models. Maybe lower open pose and use a higher depth weight and ending step. It would be nice to have a good background, but for now that will be secondary. Okay, following these points and for the images we just generated with SDXL and SD 1.5, I will pick the one by Colossus XL. It has better readability, more cohesive overall, and the armor is actually there. With SD 1.5 I can't really understand what is what. In any case, I would recommend to generate the base image with both, just to see which works best. In case you have two characters that get generated properly with SD 1.5, like in this example I made, using a high res with a high denoise strength like 0.7 will help the smaller character to follow ControlNet a lot better than if you just upscale the base result with something like 0.4. And of course, in that case, you would probably also want to use regional prompter, like this. Once you decide your base image, it's time for the third crucial point, image to image. This is where we turn this disaster into an actual image, usually following a 3-step process, even though in some cases like this last example, we will need to add one extra step. Our first goal here is to add everything. For example, instead of a watermelon sword, I want an actual sword. Regular limb painting can work if you have a good depth map, even though it's very hit or miss and will usually miss. In this case, both SDXL and SD 1.5 give us things that are usable. If that doesn't happen, like if you wanted to add a bit of the reflection of the watermelon, or erase some parts down here, you would need more control, given to you by InPaint Sketch. An extremely useful and underrated tool that I use all the time. It might take some iteration, and do not expect perfection yet. For the watermelon, I will also use InPaint Sketch, since we want the interior to be visible and both Epic Realism and SDXL seem to struggle with giving me what I want. I will paint the watermelon as I would like it and try to generate again, this time with a mask blur of 2 and the DPM2M Keras sampler. Which is important, by the way. Keras changes the image less than Euler A, for example, meaning that if you feel like the image doesn't change enough, you can try using Euler instead, and vice versa. For this, a denoising strength of 0.5 will be fine. I like SD 1.5 better when using InPaint Sketch, and in this case you can see it worked pretty well. Better than SDXL, I would say. Of course, I didn't reprompt, which can affect the result too. On that note, I don't really spend a lot of time prompting when doing this. But you do need to add enough information while making sure that you don't prompt for something that might confuse AI, like plant missing the point here. I have one more tip to tell you about InPaint Sketch later. But for now, I'll just sketch the hands and use SDXL to get some general blobs in the right position. No need for them to be perfect at this moment. And the final thing I will inpaint here is some flowing hair, to add the feeling of motion. Since she's moving forward, the hair will go backwards. Yet again, InPaint Sketch, load denoising strength, and generate. Okay, after some inpainting, we have successfully added every single thing we wanted in the image. But everything feels disconnected right now. We will be fixing that in the iterating step. Drag your current version into image to image. Then input your OpenPose ControlNet model, and for the depth model, I will also drag my current version of the image and let it pre-process with depth anything. With a bit of luck, this depth map will be pretty decent and have all the updated changes, like the hair. Or just download this pre-processed image and fix anything that you don't like. If you're asking yourself why we do this, well, we are going to generate the base image again. When using text-to-image, Stable Diffusion doesn't really understand what you mean. But if given a base image that follows what you are describing in the prompt, then you might have a good chance that it gives you a nice, cohesive image as a result. For example, using Colossus XL and using 0.5 denoising strength, we will generate a result that looks better than what we had originally. You can try changing the checkpoint, the prompt, maybe touch the CFG scale, the ControlNet weight and also the denoising strength, using a high denoising strength if you want more randomness and less if less. It's also possible to upscale the image at the same time you iterate, which I will do. I call it the iterating step because it will be very hard to know which model will give you the best results and with which parameters. Here we used SDXL, but in this pirate image I used Epic Realism, going from this thing to a pretty decent image right off the bat. For this I had a high ControlNet weight and 0.7 denoise with a DPM sampler. And for this Archer image I did the same, with this as the input and using 0.65 denoising strength. After some generations, let's move on with this one. To the third step, fixing. Pretty self-explanatory, inpainting the parts we don't like until we like them. You can also just add parts here if you want, like this pirate hat. We can select the blade and iterate to see if we get something better or cleaner. Something like this is fine. Do this for anything you want to clean up, and once you're done, we will move to the face and hands. Starting for the face here. I want to give some more detail to it, so I will use inpaint with only masked. Since she has an angry expression, I like using Colossus XL instead of Epic Realism, because SD 1.5 tends to add a lot of wrinkles. For the eyes I will use SD 1.5 though, to make them sharper and stand out. Again, switching models back and forth as we said in point 1. For the hands we have two very easy approaches, and then you have what I explained in this video. SDXL has improved a lot with hands, and now you can get lucky with spray and pray methods a lot of times. Also, thanks to Backup Blades for telling me about this, because I probably wouldn't have tried it if it wasn't for his advice, and it saves a lot of time. It is as simple as selecting the hands and prompting for hands. You can test with negative prompts and stuff, but the main idea is to quickly test if it does a good job or not. First, use whole picture with a high denoising strength to give AI the full context of the pose, as well as the freedom to make something completely new without caring about the original hands. And now we generate to see what AI thinks should go here. Well, I disagree. Maybe next time. I would suggest always trying this method first. If it works, you will save a lot of time, and if it doesn't, yeah, prepare for a bad time. Also, this is where you would import your depth map for hands if you made one. You can also try to draw some basic hand blocks with InPaint Sketch, and that can sometimes be enough for AI to see what you want. It worked for most of my other ones, but not in this case unfortunately. Not gonna lie, these are probably the worst hands I've ever had to fix. And they are not even perfect either, but it doesn't matter that much because we are about to hide them. With the last thing we will use AI for in this image. It ain't realistic to have her split a watermelon with no juice coming out of it. Sure, because the watermelon being already cut before the blade hit. So we will add the juice right now. Let's go to InPaint Sketch again, where I will show you the trick I was talking about before. One that lets you add pretty much anything you want into the image as long as you can draw a very basic shape for it. First I'm going to take some colors from the watermelon and start drawing the liquid as I want it to be. Just the shape with the color we want. Something like this. For this trick we will use ControlNet tile, so I will switch to SD 1.5. I know there's a new decent SDXL tile model, but I haven't been able to do this with it, so maybe it's just my fault to be honest. I will use it very low, like 0.25 weight and 0.3 ending step. Then just adjust the denoising strength at something like 1 or a bit less. For this specific case, we will use a high mask blur, because I don't really need the result to be exactly how I drew it, and it benefits us that it goes a bit wild on the edges. I will also add transparency just to see if it does something. This is not usually how you do this. Most of the time you will use a higher weight and a mask blur of 1 or 2. When prompting, you need to keep it short and to the point. Just describe what you wanted the sketch to be. Maybe some other stuff like motion blur, but nothing else, or you could confuse the tile model. Now just generate and here you have it. In most cases it will be a very usable result out of the bat, but sometimes things like this can happen where we are looking for something very weird and it looks disconnects. No worries though, because I don't really care much about these particles for now. We will see why in the last part of this process, but first I will go over the steps for creating this in anime style, as there are some other tips I would like you to know, and that we didn't use in this other example. Of course, the first thing I do is use Pose My Art to find a scene, and create the overall pose with the rifle and everything else. It took a while, not gonna lie, the position of the weapon was very hard to get right. I also posed the hands better this time. Even if you end up not using this controlled model, it can be a very nice safeguard to have, just in case you have a pose that AI can't handle. We export the maps for the character and the background, and then we generate the base image with Stable Diffusion, this time using PonyXL. And here is where we run into the first major issue this image has. No matter what model you try to use, it's upside down. Turns out, AI doesn't like stuff that's upside down. Talking on our Discord server, Alkeman proposed to just flip it. And even if it's not perfect, I think that's a good solution for now. After the flip, AI knows what it's looking at least for the body. The faster we go to image, the more time we save. So I will start in painting over this directly. It takes some iteration, but we get something decent for the body soon enough. I will change the face a bit too, even though I'm not looking for anything final. The second important part for this image is the gun. As we talked about before, InPaint Sketch is my go-to. Even if we do have a depth map, AI isn't having a good time with something that big. And that's why I actually used a high denoise strength and a high control net depth values, trying to give Stable Diffusion the freedom to iterate and create different parts all the time. The main reason for this is that I will save the images that have parts I like, then the idea is to get a bunch of the good parts we collected and mix them together in Photoshop, just like this. This is something I want to bring attention to. Iterating is fun and one of the strong points of AI. But a lot of times you will save 80% of time with just 20% manual work, and doing something so simple as mixing parts is a very good example of this. Then you mix it a little better with AI and low denoising strength, and you're good to go. After that, we change the face and get a better shape for the arm, with the depth mapped as a base, but not as a goal, since PonyXL and its variants are extremely good with hands. Simple inpainting with a prompt can get you in a very nice position. We will finish the hand later. Remember that for now, we're just looking for everything to be in the image. And this was the last step to finish our main focal point, the body and the weapon. In the other example, we just image to image here, but for this case we need to add one extra step, because as you see, the background has nothing to do with what I want. It's not the sky, not a building, and there ain't even a helicopter here. So the extra step is going to Photoshop, masking the character, and making a base for the background we want. I painted the buildings and helicopter in Photoshop too to save some time, but there is absolutely no need to make a detailed drawing here. This is basic enough, but even something like this, which is what I used in the Archer example, can work very well. It's just the 2080 rule I set in cases you want something very specific. Usually any background might work, and you see that I'm not using anything detailed as an input most of the time. However, now we go back to the first issue, it's upside down. We will have to flip it back and forth for when we want to fix the background or when we are focusing on the character. After that, we take full advantage of AI's forte. It's the ability to iterate fast. I create a lot of images to get different skies and clouds, as well as different buildings. Then I combine them into one image, and same with the outfit and whatever. Approaching the final version now. I just add the hair flowing down, and now we fix the hands, which is super easy with PonyXL to be honest. I will use InPaint Sketch to provide a super basic shape, and that's enough for PonyXL to generate a very decent hand. Might take a bit of luck, but not too much. Super recommended to switch to this model for hands. Also, a good thing about anime images is that you can just draw and repair parts easily like this, even painting in the part that this hand is grabbing. With this, we just need to add a few details and upscale if you need to. And the last part is Post-processing. Using the first image as an example, we can add a few colors to make the splatter seem more cohesive, and then add a bit of blur to it so it's out of focus. Now it doesn't stand out as much as before. I will also add some motion blur to the sword, like so. With some pretty basic masking, you can adjust which parts you blur and which ones you don't, trying to create a focal point in the image. If it doesn't look good, it's a skill issue. I actually think I haven't done a great job with this image, and someone with more skills than me could actually bring it to another level. But for me, learning stuff like post-processing is the fun part. I did pretty much the same thing with the sniper example, adding some random Easter eggs, and then using contrast and blur to guide the eye of the viewer through the composition. These are the final results for both of these images. I will try posting a follow-up video to every tutorial from now on. A full process long video where you can see how I start from the idea and bring it to the final image, as I explain my thought process and everything that goes through my mind. Subscribe to be notified when I post it in about a day or so. This will be the first one, so I would love some feedback on that. Thanks to you and Pose My Art for sponsoring this video. I hope it was helpful, and see ya.